So if we look maybe a little more detail at Gray's actual essay here, one of the things that he's concerned with in the very beginning is sort of discussing why death has not been such a big deal, that it has not gotten a lot of attention in, let's say, modern philosophy. If we consider modern philosophy, in a strange way, modern philosophy begins in the 17th century. I know that seems pretty long ago. But modern philosophy, as opposed to medieval philosophy, the philosophy of the Middle Ages, and ancient philosophy, which is basically Greece and Rome, there's until the 20th century, let's say, philosophers are really not very concerned with death, and they were in the ancient world. Epicurus, Plato, the Stoics all talked about the significance of death for the human being, and that kind of went out of fashion. And Gray discusses a little bit about why he thinks that's so. It's a much bigger issue, I think, than can be dealt with in a couple of pages, but he has some suggestions, and one of them is that it's the Enlightenment, progress, moving mankind forward, historical progress of human beings and society and knowledge, and death really doesn't seem like an appropriate topic, I guess. Maybe it just wasn't thought to be that important. But that would be an historical accident. You might say that there's another more philosophical reason that death was not really thought of as a proper topic of philosophical discussion, and that it was that the philosophers that he talks about, Spinoza and others, were really philosophers of being. And there's a very old tradition in philosophy that of a certain school of philosophers, you might say, that says that which is can not ever not be. That is, philosophers of being. That which is, and that which is not, is not. So that if you and I are, if we are beings, then the notion that we could somehow someday cease to exist doesn't make any sense from that point of view. Like, logically, that which is. That which is cannot not be. And although there's all sorts of very definite evidence that would suggest that human beings at a certain point cease to be, that can be seen as an illusion. I mean, their bodies do cease to be functioning organisms, but the notion that the person has soul or spirit or mind, if those things have being, then death itself is kind of an illusion. It's much more complicated than that, and maybe that's a really crude way of putting it, but I think that's what Gray is saying, is that the philosophies that dominated thought in the centuries preceding the 20th century just didn't really have room for something like death as non-being. Whereas that is at the very heart of existentialist philosophy, the notion of non-being itself. And this is where things really, I think, start to get going in Gray's essay, and that is on page 116, where he talks about the mood of existentialism, existentialism as a kind of a not being at home in the world, alienation. Okay, but things really, I think, get going again on page 116 when he starts talking about Heidegger and the feeling of the uncanny. He says on page 116, he says that the German term unheimlich, which literally translates as unhomelike, has in fact the denotation of the uncanny. When you feel in German unheimlich zumute, you are seized with a nameless fear. You are out of your element, but more than that, you have an intuition of abysses hidden from normal moods. These rare experiences of the uncanny, the existentialists hold, are revelatory of the innermost nature of reality. At such times we feel a sense of deep unease. We are threatened and oppressed by everything in general and nothing in particular. We are filled with dread or anguish, a psychological state which has for the existentialists metaphysical origins. If someone asks us what is troubling us when we are oppressed with this feeling of the uncanny, we are likely to answer, it is nothing. These words are truer than we know. For what has oppressed us is the primary intuition that we are not sustained by infinite power and plenitude of being, as so many philosophers have taught. On the contrary, we human creatures perceive dimly in the experience of the uncanny that the world rests on nothing. It has no basis or ground. Human existence, as one form of being, is suspended over the abyss of non-being. As Heidegger puts it, to exist as a human being means to be exposed to nothingness. Now, if we were to talk about metaphysics and theories of reality and theories of the basic structure of reality and how we conceptualize it in a fundamental way, we could talk about the two categories of being as opposed to nothingness, being and non-being. And that would take us pretty deeply into something that's not exactly what this course is about. However, there is this notion that the world is sustained by nothing. That the world is not sustained. Let's say it's an atheist view, first of all. That is, that the world is not sustained by an infinitely powerful and perfect being that created it and has a plan for it and sustains it, but rather the world is it's a very vulnerable place, and we are vulnerable creatures within it. And I think that that's more to the point of what we're talking about. For instance, when Heidegger, this philosopher that he's concerned with, Martin Heidegger, who was a 20th century philosopher, German philosopher, Heidegger says to exist as a human being means to be exposed to nothingness. And that becomes really I would say, one of the most important ideas that comes out of this essay is that human existence is an existence of exposure, of vulnerability. That is, that we are constantly on the edge of nothingness, and that nothingness, in our case, is death. That is, to be a human being is to be exposed to death at every moment. He says, top of page 117, nothingness precedes, envelops, and conditions all being. That is, in what Heidegger would call Dasein, or being there, which is his name for human being, or the human way of being. The human way of being is to live every moment knowing that it could be your last moment. To constantly be exposed to the possibility of your own non-existence. Nothingness precedes, envelops, and conditions all being. In the experience of dread, we are confronted with the hidden truth that there is no ultimate consolation, that the end of all striving is shipwreck, the abyss of non-being. It is hard to discover this truth, harder still to face it and live by it. Weak natures never know this mood of dread at all, Kierkegaard insisted. I don't like that talk of weak natures and stuff like that. I think that's really not right. But it does point up the fact that, okay, if Heidegger's right, and every moment of human existence is a moment of exposure to our own non-being, our annihilation, our death, then that would be something that would be quite difficult to face. It's something that we would quite naturally want to avoid and avoid thinking about. And that brings, I think, us naturally to this notion of Geborgenheit. If you look at the bottom of the same page, 117, this notion, let's say the last paragraph, it says, our true condition is one of exposure. In reality, we are defenseless, naked to the winds of chance and blind accident. But then he introduces the German word Geborgenheit, which just means being secure or safe. That we have a natural tendency to want to feel secure and safe. Of course we do. From the time, especially when we're children, we need that sense of security. We need that sense that we are in place and that we are not exposed constantly to danger. And you can lock your door, or you can drive your car at a safe speed, or you can avoid fatty foods or smoking or using drugs or jumping out of airplanes and attain some degree of relative safety, but you can't ever really be safe, right? Because of the kind of being you are, constantly exposed to the possibility of death. So that's why he's at the bottom of that page, though the desire for protection and security for Geborgenheit is a characteristic and primary impulse of human creatures. It is also a profound illusion. That is, that we naturally seek safety and security and a feeling of being, in a way, absolutely safe, absolutely secure. But that's a theological notion. Only God could provide that kind of absolute safety, right? But this is, the world that we've been looking at, the world of Epicurus, the world of the existentialists, is essentially a godless world, an atheist world. And in that sort of world, there is nothing there that sort of guarantees the safety, guarantees security. We're always on the edge of non-being, and that's it. And eventually we will be engulfed by it. And that perhaps leads to the next part of the essay, Karl Jasper's notion of the boundary situation.